Right, who is ready for an absolutely crazy resin art technique that looks holographic? It's absolutely incredible. So this one kind of come from video 271 where we made these 3D shells using hairspray and a resin skull, and we could pop the resin skull out leaving this shell. We're not going to be doing it that way because I know some people are still struggling with that technique. We're going to do it in a much easier and safer method, and we're going to do it with epoxy. So this got me wondering about, you know, brushing the inside with interference powders, aurora powders, and giving a strange effect, but it kind of went a little bit further than that off camera. So we're going to be using, some of you may already have this mold from a previous video that I showed you. We got some crazy effects. We're going to be using this small face shape. We're not going to be filling it to the top though, because we do need to, once it's cured, pop it into our normal oval shape cabochons. And I'm just going to be using some aurora nail powders for this one. So to begin with, this one really is an easy technique. Just going to begin by brushing the powder all over the inside of my mold. Honestly, when I say this is easy, this is about as easy as they get. And just make sure you're getting all of the nooks and crannies and just fully cover that. And make sure no bristles come off if you brush either. You don't want bristles. Now you don't have to go and get this mold if you haven't got it. You can experiment with different shapes. It's all about kind of coating the mold and then applying your clear. It's just the stages. You can then transfer that onto bigger, smaller, different shapes. I'm just going to show you the process behind this particular piece. All I'm going to do now is mix up some of my collab resin. It really is that simple. And you can do this with UV resin. I'll show you after I've got to this stage how you would do this with UV resin and get it to cure properly. So we are just going to pour our resin into our mold. Again, not all the way up, and I'll explain that when it comes to the next step. Now once you've poured, you need to check, especially around the nose and the eyes, for bubbles. But if I go sticking my stick in there and manipulating the bubbles out, if I touch that powder, it's going to leave a scratch mark. So don't touch the mold, but take the tip of whatever you're using quite close and just try and kind of work it out by the movement of the resin, if that makes sense. If you've got good eyes, I'm struggling, you can just touch the bubble and give it a slight push out. There it goes. See that one? I'll try and get a zoom in when I edit. Just try and get those bubbles out. If you've got a heat mat, go and whack it on your heat mat and cure it quicker. So our face is now fully cured. You can see it's fairly shallow, which is what we want for the next step. If it's too big, we're going to run into issues. We don't want issues. And anything like this doesn't really matter. You're not going to see it. So don't worry about sanding or taking that off. It is absolutely fine. So for the next step, we are going to be putting our face into an oval shaped cabochon. So if you're doing this with, the trouble is, guys, when you start using UV resin, you become a little bit more impatient with epoxy. But if you're doing this stage with epoxy, it's absolutely fine. Just do exactly what I'm doing. Now, the tricky part is knowing how much to put in before you put in the face, because you don't want the resin to overspill. But I am going to be speeding this part up by using UV resin. And this under here is just a mini pyramid mold that I've got. I tend to use that just to rest things on. It's really handy for me. So I'm just going to fill up that oval shape. This is the new mold from Resin Rockers. Again, all links are in the description box below. Now we want to float the face on the resin. Now the reason why we didn't do the face so deep in the face mold was because we can run into issues with the nose. If the nose touches the mold, for the next step, it could cause issues. So we want that nose to be, you know, a good millimeter or two away from the mold, if that makes sense. The other thing you have to bear in mind with this shape mold is that this actually has some nostrils. So what you can do, if you wanted to, preferably before pouring that resin in there, because you're going to need a lamp to cure it, is just fill those nostrils. If you're doing this with epoxy, you can just fill them and go over the eye areas and the mouth before placing it in. But if you're doing it with UV resin, what you can do is infill them and then cure them before putting it in. It's up to you how you do it, but those are going to create bubbles if we just go and place that in that fresh resin. Or if you've got a little UV flashlight, just cure it to the side. So I've just filled mine with UV resin and cured them. Now these come in really handy for stuff like this, because when you're putting stuff in resin, actually I'm just going to do it without them. I was going to say the little Windows hole makers, you know, the suction sticks, they work really well with stuff like this. You're not getting resin on your fingers, but I don't really need to. If you've got them, it's handy for this. Now I'm just going to insert that onto the resin and just, I want it to float. I don't want it to sink, like so. And just position it before we begin to cure it. And out comes the beast. I'm just going to give that a couple of minutes. Now you'll see where we've cured it, where it was floating on the surface of the resin, it's got this dip, which is fine because now we can just top that up. It is important because if that was to have been fully submerged, that means that that face is going to sink and potentially touch the mold. Again, same with epoxy. You want to float the face on the surface. When you start getting epoxy over the top or the sides, it's then going to become an issue because it could sink in the resin. You don't want that. So I'm just going to make mine fully flat now. Now that is flat and cured, I can pop this out. I've got a few micro bubbles in there, but I'm not worried. You shouldn't be able to see them. So, I mean, it's pretty cool as it is. You may prefer it like this. It's entirely up to you, but it's not the look, the holographic look that I want anyway. So the next step is, some of you are going to gasp, I know, I'm going to sand the face down. Now you could, if you wanted to as well, is add a backing dusting and then layer that again, like the double layer colour, and that will give it a separate effect. I've done some on the side, I'll show you afterwards. So for this, I'm just going to use a heavily worn, this is a 320 grit. I'm just going to wet that and then just sand over the whole piece. So once sanding, I just keep wiping it with some isopropyl, and you can see there's like small shiny areas where it just needs sanding a little bit more. Now also the reason for sanding this is if I didn't and I was to place this in, say, a bezel like this, you'd be able to see straight through the piece and you'd see all of this texture. It just ruins the vibe. I wish I kept it clear and shown you now, but use this heart as an example. That's what you'd see through the whole piece, and it just looks messy. So to get this to work with UV resin, because these molds aren't really made for UV resin, the light struggles to penetrate through the resin to be able to fully cure it. And what can happen is when you demold that, most of the powder is still going to be stuck to the mold and it's going to be very patchy and not cured fully. We don't want that. So you can do it in layers, but the trouble is UV resin can shrink. So when you pour in the next layer, it can seep down the sides and it's going to create a really deformed piece. So the way that you can do this, and this will work with most non-UV resin molds, is that we create a shell. It does help if you have a powerful lamp. I mean, I'm going to be putting mine on 48 watts to be able to do this, but definitely give it a try. So I'm just going to pour in a thin amount, a small amount, and I'm just going to keep rotating the mold. Bring it all the way to the top. I know we don't need the full depth, but I'd rather fill it to the top and trim off any excess than go a little bit shallower. And then when it comes to filling it up, again, leaking down the sides and creating a mess. So my lamp is ready to the side of me. So once I'm happy that this is fully cured, I'm going to turn on my lamp to the side and then whack it straight inside. Then what I do is just turn it over and put it back in for another minute. Right, so now we have a cured shell. What that acts as is kind of a translucent mold now. So when we add more resin, my mask's riding up my face, the light can penetrate through the fresh resin and through the shell to cure the fresh resin. If that resin? I sound like Sean Connery there. Shaken, not stirred. So that will allow the light to pass through the fresh resin. I nearly did it again. And cure properly. If you want to, you could do this in 2 layers. It's up to you. But remember, we do need it shallow still. But I'm happy to just go in with 1 pour now and cure that. Probably going to get some bubbles. It's just to show you as an idea. Now this also works with molds like this. I did a short video on a different platform yesterday doing exactly the same thing, making a shell, then filling it up. But it is important once you demold it to pop it back inside, just to double make sure that all of the inside resin is cured. So I can now pop this out. So when I did the first shell, I put it under the lamp this way for 2 minutes before I turned it over. And you'll see there's no powder left on the mold, and it's all on the face. Again, just to make double sure, pop it back inside the lamp, give it another minute, just to be 100%. Whoops. And that's how you do it with UV resin. Right, we're all done. I've got a few others that I'll show you, and I'll show you the nose issue on one piece that I did. As always, give the video a thumbs up, drop me a comment. If you haven't subbed, hit that button for me. I'm not sure if I've already said it, but thank you to all my subs, all my members, anyone who's bought me a coffee or a super thanks. I've slept since I started this video, so I've forgotten whether I've said it. I could have just watched it back, but who cares? Thanks again. Right, so this one is one that I did earlier, and the nose was just touching the mold. So when it comes to sanding, what happened is it actually took off the aurora powder off the nose. I could potentially fix it if I wanted to, but I thought we'll just work around it. And I realized that I just needed the face mold to be a little bit shallower so that it wasn't so close. So when it comes to the sanding, it just didn't affect it. So when I said about doubling colours, I went on with a separate colour aurora powder. Actually, I think I went in with 3 on this one. I went with the face colour, then I backed the head colour, just the head shape, sorry, with a different colour, and then I backed the whole piece with a reddish colour, but the red doesn't really show through much. It does in certain light, but it's absolutely crazy. It looks so holographic. Here's the one that we've just made. And this will only work with aurora style powders. It's really hard to capture this on camera because of the light. We try and get a better shot. It's showing up better out of the bezel. I've put my phone flash on as well, so it's brightened it up. But it is crazy. Imagine the shapes, different designs that we could do with this. If you added a black background, I know some of you are probably already typing it in the comments, it does make a difference, but it doesn't kind of hide it as much like a hologram. It's more prominent. It's like it's always there, but without it, it's in certain lights you'll see it, if that makes sense. With a black background, it's just the face will always be visible, but kind of in certain angles, the faces do disappear completely. It's hard to show. Turn my flash off again. But yeah, I think it's absolutely crazy. I love it. That actually gives it a different type of glow, because the light bounces through, hits that silver, bounces back with the refraction. So yeah, have a play around with your Aurora colours. And those were just the nail powders. Again, links in the description box below. Hope you enjoyed that one. I will see you for the next one. Just remember, don't get your nose too close. Bye for now.